around balcony that stretched the entire length of the entrance foyer. The balcony itself was being held up by rounded wooden pillars of a thick girth which were evenly spaced throughout the room at precise increments. The railings and banisters appeared to be crafted of the same wood and varnished to seemingly shine under the multi-light fixture glow coming from a beautiful crystal chandelier hanging high above. Two side built-in staircases at the far end of the room led to the balcony on two opposing sides, and from what was visible, it appeared as though bookshelves dominated the upper floor above. Shifting his gaze to the end of the room where two open archways on either side of the wall led to undisclosed parts of the obviously high-class home, Ash whistled. Wow, this place looks more like a rich person's home than it does a gym. Giselle glanced around. Maybe we came to the wrong place and that gym symbol outside was just a random thing that whoever owns this place got a hold of somehow. I assure you, young miss, this most definitely is a gym, and that league symbol outside was very well earned. A polite, proper and gentlemanly voice spoke up as a middle-aged man dressed in ritzy, high-end, lounge clothes, appeared from the right-hand archway at the far end of the room. Stepping out into the light of the chandelier far above the man was revealed to be around his 50s and looked very well groomed with a closely trimmed salt and pepper mustache upon his upper lip, fully gray combed back hair and a sharp, angular face that showed both intelligence and refinement. Referring to his choice of lounge attire, the man wore blue slipper-like shoes on his feet, a lighter shade of blue slacks on his lower body, a slightly tan robe which was open at the chest to reveal a red kerchief underneath adorning his torso, and a long black cane with a gold handle held firmly in his right hand. Ash stepped forward as soon as he saw the older man and raised a hand placatingly. I'm sorry, sir, is this really the Shurabi Town Pokémon Gym? We saw the emblem outside above the door, so we just walked in. I knocked and didn't hear anyone, so. However, the boy was cut off by the man raising a hand and chuckling. Please, dear boy, feel no need to explain yourself. After all, if I didn't want newcomers entering my home freely, I never would have become a gym leader in the first place and allowed the league to put that symbol above my door. Another small chuckle escaped his lips. The way I see it, whosoever takes on the responsibility of adorning that most noble of emblems above their abode, of which signifies your allegiance to our most fair and just of governors at the Pokémon League, should only expect for traveling dreamers seeking a chance at glory to come venturing through their door at any hour. Ash and his friends shared a quick glance with one another at the interesting man's unique choice of finely woven speech before he suddenly appeared to become aghast and waved the hand not holding his cane into the air. Ah, where are my manners? Introductions. Quickly making his way to his guests, the man held his hand out and shook each of their own hands in kind. My name is Jeremiah and I welcome you most warmly to my humble home. Stepping back then, he gestured at himself and finished in a tone that clearly held the pride he felt for his title. I am also the Shurabi Town Gym leader and specialize in full-on, double-style Pokémon battles. Taking a low bow, he finished respectfully. At your service most indubitably. Ash scratched his head slowly as he tried to find a way to respond to the eccentric man's greeting. Yeah, thanks. My name's Ash and this is Pikachu. Pikachu Pie. The cheerful electric type greeted as Jeremiah reached out and gently rubbed his head. Well, hello there, Pikachu. Wonderful to meet you indeed. After Ash's friends gave their own greetings, the older man stepped back and smiled. To be honest, I am a little surprised you kids managed to find my gym or even heard about it. I just recently moved here from Sinnoh last year and became certified as a gym leader a few short months back. I haven't had many challengers yet, so it is a surprise to see so many of you at once. Ash raised his hand. Sir, it's just me. And we didn't even know about your gym until the leader of the Boulder Town Gym told us about you before we left. Jeremiah appeared interested to hear that. Really? Well, that does sound like a good bit of luck. Actually, Brock spoke up. If your gym really was just opened this year, then few people will know about it. They don't update the Kanto guidebook except for once every year, and that includes information on new gyms. Yours probably won't be added and mentioned until next year, most likely to give you time to adjust and really prepare yourself. That's what the Boulder Town Gym leader told us. Jeremiah spun his cane and chuckled. Well, I do believe I am. As ready as I will ever be. If you are ready to battle, young man, then so am I. Ash smiled in the way he normally did before a big battle. All right, let's do it. Turning around, the old man started walking back to the archway he had come from earlier. Then follow me outside to the battlefield, children. Doing as requested, Ash and his friends followed Jeremiah through the archway and into a long hallway that had knickknacks, souvenirs and other antiques displayed on both sides of it before stepping outside through another archway with a door and into what resembled a big garden-style courtyard. The area of the battlefield itself was basically shaped into a large square ring made of stone with flowers, trees and other greenery of varying types set in a perimeter all around the courtyard. Also, at the very front of the stone ring was a beautiful sanctuary pond made of a different kind of stone with a small waterfall at the front falling down into the clean and mostly clear-looking water below. Stepping out onto his side of the stone courtyard, Jeremiah leaned on his cane and called over to Ash as he took his own position. Would a 6-on-6 double battle suit you, young man? I trust you have a full team. Ash nodded as Pikachu jumped down to stand beside of him. That's fine with me. Reaching up, the older man lightly stroked his mustache with a small nod. I hope you don't mind, but we'll have to have this battle without a referee today. Mine is out sick, so if you are okay with it, I was thinking we could both just be a couple of honest chaps and judge our own battle. What do you say? Ash shrugged. That works for me, I won't cheat you. Smiling earnestly, Jeremiah nodded in agreement. That's the spirit. Now let us see how well you handle my unique Pokémon, young Ash. The spry old man then pulled out 2 Pokeballs from inside of his lounge robes and held them together in one hand. Glameow, Stunky, come fight with me, my friends. In 2 identical bursts of light, both Sinnoh native Pokémon appeared on the stone ground and sounded off their presence. Glameow, Stunky. Wow, Sinnoh Pokémon. Giselle exclaimed excitedly. You don't see those often. Misty gave her own words of gushing praise at the appearance of 2 such unique and rare Pokémon for the Kanto region, but Soledad remained silent. Her attention focused onto the battle to be had ahead, as she merely hoped that Ash wouldn't get thrown off of his game by having to battle 2 Pokémon that he had probably never seen in person before. It was a moot fear, however, as the boy simply remained calm and then chose his first team for the match. Parasect, Weepinbell. Show them what real teamwork is. Parasect, Weepinbell. Both Kanto native Pokémon called out as they appeared side by side, looking ready for an all-out brawl. Given that they didn't have to wait on a referee to give the customary rundown of rules and then announce when they could begin or not, Ash took the initiative himself to do so immediately and raised his hand while commanding, Weepinbell, Parasect. Use Vine Whip and Spore. Moving like they were on autopilot, Weepinbell and Parasect sent dozens of sharp leaves and a cloud of paralyzing spore directly at their opponents. However, Glameow and Stunky proved to be fast and well-trained, as the former quickly leapt out of the way of the incoming rain of leaves gracefully, while its partner stood its ground up to the point where Jeremiah ordered it to use acid spray to counter stun spore. Opening its mouth and calling its name, Stunky shot burst after burst of sludge at the cloud of spore, which broke the haze apart until nothing remained of it but straggling flecks which gradually faded away into the wind. Immediately thereafter, the old man yelled, Glameow, use Slash, and Stunky, Poison Cloud. Showing speed that existed outside of just evasion, the 4-legged cat sped forward at Weepinbell while Stunky raised its tail and then sent a cloud of inky, toxic purple poison at its opponents across the courtyard. Weepinbell extended 2 vines and met Glameow head-on and used the long grassy appendages to clash with the graceful Pokemon's extended class, while Parasect, on the other hand, expelled a thick haze of yellow spores out from under his shell again, which rose up into the air and started to mingle and mix with the cloud of poison coming towards the bug type. As Weepinbell and Parasect battled it out over claws and vines using multiple Slash and Vine Whip attacks, Stunky moved in towards Parasect as its trainer ordered the foul odor-emitting Pokémon to move in and use Fury Swipes. Not one to stand idly by, Parasect used the ability and speed Soledad's special training had been giving him to start moving and dodging away from Stunky with every swipe the Sinnoh native sent his way. the bug type showing a small level of grace in his movements that simply hadn't existed a few days prior. Finally breaking away from their close quarters combat, Weepinbell did so first after slapping both of Glameow's paws away and then wrapped his vines around the other Pokemon's legs, tripping it up in mid-step as Glameow fell to the ground. Hopping back while Ash yelled, "Weepinbell Razor Leaf!" The grass type moved his leafy appendages back and forth quickly, launching several more sharp projectiles at Glameow, who wasn't fast enough to dodge them and went tumbling back across the hard stone ground while giving a small cry of pain. Meanwhile, on the other end of the field, Stunky, being more agile than Parasect was, weaved to the side just as the bug type went to swipe at it with his own slash attack and then spun around. Jumping at Parasect like a little purple and white blur with both claws extended and glowing black, it used them like cutting knives and raked them down the bug type's front with enough force to send him skidding back. Just as Weepinbell was about to move in however and help Parasect, Glameow shot up and as Jeremiah yelled, "Use hypnosis." Ash tried to get his Pokemon's attention. Weepinbell, get out of the way of Glameow's line of sight, now. The normal type was very fast with the speed of its attacks because no sooner did Weepinbell turn and look back at his opponent and Glameow's eyes were already glowing a hypnotic red. Try as he might, Weepinbell found himself swaying back and forth under the influence of the sleep-inducing move, which only grew worse as rings started to form the stronger the attack became. The hypnotically pulsing circular formations encircling Weepinbell and slowly causing his eyes to become heavier and heavier until he finally fell back to the ground in a deep sleep. Parasect saw the danger his teammate was in and to help save Weepinbell from such peril he overcame his pain from getting gashed by Stunky and moved forward quickly, using his greater body mass to barrel over the Pokémon that had been his opponent while charging Glameow. Not expecting the speed burst Parasect was showing, Glameow looked away from Weepinbell just as the other Pokémon slammed into it like a bowling ball and then brought one of his pincers up while glowing white. The heavy and thick appendage slashed straight across Glameow's hide with enough force to cause the Pokémon to cry out loudly as it went flying back and tumbled along the ground. Parasect then stood beside of the now fast asleep Weepinbell and shifted his eyes back and forth intently while Stunky and Glameow slowly got up and began moving back and forth, preparing for the inevitable double charge they were about to make in an attempt to take out both of their targets at one time. Seeing the dangerous, outnumbered situation his Pokémon was now in, Ash called over to him, "Parasect, stay focused. Don't let them intimidate you and don't let one get in behind you." The very next moment, Glameow and Stunky took off as one while hearing their trainer order for them to both use slash. Parasect on the other hand didn't have any plans of letting them get that close as he chanted, "Parasect," and sent another wave of spore out in the direction both Pokémon were charging in from. Not to be deterred however, both Sinnoh natives used the speed and maneuverability their small bodies granted them and ran out to the sides, mostly bypassing the cloud of spores as Stunky reached Parasect first and swiped at him. Turning around, Parasect brought one pincer up and blocked the extended, sharpened claws of Stunky before needing to immediately shift his attention as soon as he saw Glameow moving in to attack the sleeping Weepinbell. Smacking Stunky's paw away with his other pincer, Parasect brought the now freed appendage up and bashed the pungent Pokémon across the face, knocking it away successfully before spinning around as fast as his awkward body could carry him and facing Glameow. Bringing both pincers up as they glowed brightly, Parasect then rushed forward like a Tauros and slammed his full body weight and both pincers into the feline Pokémon's much more lithe form. The difference in weight and power being evident as Glameow was launched back with a grunt while Ash's Pokémon himself stumbled a few paces in the opposite direction and rubbed at his face with one pincer. The bug type having taken Glameow's own slash attack almost directly to the face while trying to protect Weepinbell. As Stunky and Glameow regrouped and recovered from Parasect's counterstrike, they both shared a look which translated a decision the two of them obviously agreed on. Facing their opponent again, neither of Jeremiah's Pokémon wasted time as the old man yelled out once more, "Take Parasect out together both of you. Double slash attack." Speeding forwards, Glameow and Stunky jumped at Parasect with claws extended while the bug type did the same to his own pincers and held his ground, preparing to take both of them on no matter how futile the effort may have seemed. As all three Pokémon engaged in a full 2-on-1, all-out brawl that utilized attacks like Slash, Fury Attack and Night Slash as the main weapons of choice, Parasect fought bravely, intensely and as powerfully as possible while blocking, parrying and striking back out against Glameow and Stunky with every ounce of willpower he possessed. Even though he did indeed fight bravely, unfortunately the odds were vastly against him and it showed the longer the battle went on. Even though Parasect was physically stronger, Glameow and Stunky were smaller and much more agile, and this showed in the rate of speed their attacks were able to move at compared to his own. For every time Parasect would block, counter and then try to strike out at his opponents, Glameow and Stunky would simply move to the side or leap away and then lash out at him from another angle. A few times he managed to hit them, but as the one-sided battle drew on, the bug type grew more and more tired while Jeremiah's Pokémon looked barely even winded from having taken turns alternating in and out to attack Parasect. Finally, after one well-placed slash to Parasect's legs courtesy of Glameow who moved in quickly while Stunky distracted him, the bug type grunted in pain and fell to one side as both Pokémon jumped next to each other and faced off against him. Just as Parasect attempted to stand, Jeremiah's Pokémon rushed him at one time and tackled their foe with all of their body weight, Parasect immediately tumbling and rolling back across the ground before coming to a stop. Struggling to stand back up, Parasect locked his eyes onto Glameow and Stunky while Ash yelled out to him, "Come on Parasect, you can do this. Don't let them win, show those two how powerful you really are." With a final groan of determination, Parasect forced himself up just as his body started to glow a bright, luminous, almost forest green color. Wisps of energy emitting from his body as his eyes glowed green as well and became strangely eerie. Blinking, Jeremiah quickly commanded of Stunky, "Use Toxic and put an end to whatever Parasect is doing, Stunky." Stunk. Stunky, why? The Sinnoh Pokémon called out as it shot a glob of nasty purple poison straight at Parasect. However, it was too late because at that exact same moment the bug type made his move as multiple tendrils of what was now revealed to be Giga Drain shot forth from around him and soared towards Glameow and Stunky, thrashing straight through the goopy poison and dissipating it while continuing on towards its targets unimpeded. Seeing the danger clearly, Glameow and Stunky attempted to run away, but they weren't even close to fast enough as the energy-sapping ethereal tendrils of Giga Drain wrapped themselves around both smaller Pokémon and hoisted them up in the air, all while beginning to drain their energy and feed it back to Parasect. As Jeremiah's Pokémon cried out in pain, Misty cheered, "Yeah, Parasect, way to go. Let 'em have it." Several moments later the tendrils gradually disappeared and allowed Glameow and Stunky to fall to the stone ground heavily just as Weepinbell slowly started to awaken and blinked his eyes open. Getting into an upright position, the obviously confused grass type looked first at the downed Stunky and Glameow before glancing over towards the freshly healed Parasect. Said bug type just shared a glance with Weepinbell and the two Pokémon took several moments of silence as they just silently seemed to communicate on everything that had happened. Eventually, it seemed as though the memory of what happened came rushing back to Weepinbell and he looked towards their opponents again before glancing back to Parasect. Realizing that his partner had basically defended him the whole time while he was out cold, the grass type dipped his head in an obvious sign of respect which Parasect accepted and caused a small smile to cross Ash's lips since he saw it as well. However, the touching and happy moment was promptly ruined when, slowly, Stunky and Glameow stood up on wobbly legs while looking towards the ground. Just when everyone thought both Pokémon were about to fall to the ground, a turn for the absolute worst simply had to happen as Jeremiah's battling duo started to glow the exact time in a very distinctive and recognizable fashion. One in which all present noticed and seemed to deflate the current momentum that Weepinbell and Parasect had gained. When the light finally died down a short time later, two fully recovered and much larger Pokémon stood in the place of Glameow and Stunky. Those being the powerful and much stronger evolutionary stages of the two, Purugly and Skuntank. whom called their new names to the sky proudly and loudly, Puru, Skuin. Oh come on. Giselle complained with a disbelieving expression that was directed towards both newly evolved Pokémon. No fair. Give them a break already. Soledad crossed her arms. Well, this battle is about to get a lot more interesting. Brock and Misty nodded mutely while Jeremiah seemed to gush over his newly evolved Pokémon. Oh, this is so absolutely fantastic. My beautiful Stunky and Glameow have evolved into two even more incredible and amazing Pokémon. What a wonderful change of fortune. Getting back to where he was in the present moment a short few seconds later though, the rich old man wasn't about to let such a valuable moment to steal the upper hand pass by, and that's why he raised his hand and commanded quickly, Purugly, Skuntank, let's show them your new power. Hypnosis and Flamethrower now. Fully rejuvenated and ready to go, both freshly evolved Pokémon instantly did as requested as Purugly's eyes glowed red and several even larger rings than before of hypnotizing energy flew towards Parasect and Weepinbell, all while Skuntank opened its maw and sent a thick stream of flames right at them. Specifically Weepinbell. Already surprised by the sudden very unexpected turn of events, Ash's Pokémon had no time for a counter nor he to command one as they both scattered and separated from each other in an attempt to avoid the two potentially very damaging attacks coming their way. Unfortunately, that proved to be just what Purugly and Skuntank was waiting for as, utilizing a rate of speed that had only further been increased by their evolution, both Pokémon took off in a burst of speed and appeared next to Weepinbell and Parasect like the wind itself. Catching the other two off guard, both of Jeremiah's Pokémon used Slash at the same time and hit their targets with a direct score, Weepinbell and Parasect crying out in pain as they were sent flying through the air away from their attackers. Taking off after Weepinbell, Skuntank came up on the grass type in mere seconds and elongated its claws again before beginning a brutal volley of vicious fury swipes that caught Weepinbell unprepared and unable to dodge as he took the full brunt of each hit. Launching itself up into the air some ways away just as Parasect regained his bearings and turned around, Purugly fell like a heavy stone to the ground on Jeremiah's merciless command of Body Slam. Before Parasect could move away, the full mass of Purugly's weight slammed itself down upon him and flattened the bug type back to the earth again with a grunt of pain. Standing up and backing away, Purugly then charged once more and head-rammed Parasect so hard it actually lifted him off the ground and into the air where he soared for several seconds before hitting the stone ground once again with a loud thump. Moments later, Weepinbell was also landing in a heap next to his teammate courtesy of Skuntank while both Pokémon lay there in pain after enduring such brutal hits one after the other in so short a period of time. Ash was trying to find a way to help turn the battle around in his Pokémon's favor, but, obviously, Purugly and Skuntank wasn't keen in letting him have such a luxury as they rushed their downed opponents again and started pummeling them restlessly using move after move, hit after hit, with no signs of slowing down and no need of a command from Jeremiah. Over the sounds of multiple brutal hits, the pained noises Ash's Pokémon were making and the occasional sounds Purugly and Skuntank would make as they attacked, his friends were all but cringing. Ash, you gotta do something or Parasect and Weepinbell are gonna get hurt. Brock shouted to his friend. Yeah, come on Ash, you've gotten out of tougher places than this before. Misty yelled in agreement with her hands over her mouth. Don't just stand there. Ash knew everything they were saying to be true, but when your Pokémon were getting constantly attacked and knocked for a vicious loop, it made actually forming any kind of strategy that much tougher and, apparently, Jeremiah endeavored to end the battle before he could. Skuntank. He shouted just as his Pokémon finally backed away from a battered and bruised Weepinbell and Parasect. Use Toxic. Ash's eyes widened, but before he could say even a word, Skuntank was already firing a large stream of toxic, thick purple ooze straight at his Pokémon that was far more powerful than he was previously capable of as a Stunky. Exhausted and battered, both Pokémon only had enough time to look up as the torrent of toxic sludge descended upon them and washed over Weepinbell and Parasect. The two of them instantly crying out in terrible pain as the poisonous effects of the debilitating attack took instant effect and began running rampant through their systems like a rebel force. As they both lay there on the ground with a dark purple discoloration now marring their skin and sparks of similar colored energy buzzing off of their bodies, Weepinbell and Parasect cringed and writhed in pain while Skuntank prepared to end the battle with one last move. Thinking he was about to give the finishing command, Jeremiah ordered swiftly, "Use flamethrower, Skuntank." As a bright red-orange ball of flames coalesced in the dual poison type's mouth, Skuntank reared back and then unleashed the plume of flames with a bellow of its name. As the swirling vortex of fire neared them both, Weepinbell opened his eyes while still struggling against the pain of the toxic poison coursing through his body and saw the jet of flames nearing the two of them. Looking over at Parasect and seeing his teammate in no condition to run or fight back, the grass type faced forward and narrowed his eyes in determination as he struggled into an upright position and then mustered every bit of strength he had remaining to throw himself completely into the line of fire. Determined to return the favor of defense Parasect had paid him when he was unwillingly asleep. Just as the extremely effective torrent of flames made contact with Weepinbell and trapped him within the cone of burning ferocity, the scream of the grass type could be heard echoing all throughout the courtyard. Ash gritted his teeth and went to step forward, but he knew there was nothing he could do except stand by and watch as his Pokémon was roasted alive inside of the fiery vortex with seemingly no end in sight. His friends themselves were even in a state of panic and shock, fearful that Weepinbell might become far more than simply injured by the element that all of his kind detested. Parasect looked on with wide eyes of disbelief that Weepinbell would take such a potentially crippling attack head-on just for his sake, and if not for the poison coursing through his system and immobilizing him, the bug type would have been rushing to his partner's aid without a moment's hesitation. As it was though, all he could do was lay there and watch dreadfully, not knowing what would become of his teammate as the fire raged on in front of him. Finally, the flames eventually died down, and as they did, it revealed the sight of a badly charred and unmoving Weepinbell laying prone on the ground. As smoke arose from his body, all was eerily quiet and calm, and this made everyone watching assume and fear for the worse. Even Jeremiah, Brock, Misty, Giselle and Soledad could say nothing except look on in wide-eyed fear for the life of their friend's Pokémon, while Pikachu cried out to Weepinbell and was echoed by Parasect. Ash himself stared almost blankly at Weepinbell's unmoving form. Several emotions coursed through his being at that time, but the most prevalent was dread, fear, disbelief and even some wild hope that his refusal to end the battle and withdraw Parasect and Weepinbell didn't just result in the unthinkable death of one of his Pokémon. Slowly, his lips moved. The words mute and silent at first before becoming slightly more coherent and audible the longer it went on. Eventually, after several seconds of almost feeling numb and unable to fully process the situation, Ash lunged forward and yelled at the top of his lungs. The world crashing back to him like a bucket of ice-cold water. Weepinbell. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX. All he could feel was dark. There was simply nothing anywhere. His body felt light and weightless, like he was floating on a cloud, but with no conscious or clear knowledge of exactly where he was at. When Weepinbell opened his eyes, he saw nothing but darkness as far as the eye could see. A heavy, thick darkness with nothing to be felt, seen or heard. This of course left him in a state of total confusion, since the last thing he remembered seeing was the bright wall of flames surrounding him. The glow of the hot fire as it burned and seemingly melted his very skin off, and the grueling agony he felt before everything just went black. It was only in that moment of recollection did Weepinbell finally see something start to form in the blackness around him. Although, not so much in front of him as it appeared to be happening within his mind's eye. Like a screen of images playing themselves over in a sequence that he previously had seen beforehand. As the light grew into something more, he started to see shapes, objects and images form and combine together until they finally shaped themselves into what Weepinbell knew to be memories. Memories of when he was a young Bellsprout wandering the forests near Cerulean City on his own. Of when his first trainer caught him and how the insensitive, unkind and heartless young man had forced him to battle against Pokémon that were levels ahead of his own and constantly defeated and humiliated him with seemingly the greatest of ease. He relived how, time and time again, his former trainer would berate and belittle him for losing all of their battles until, After one particularly intense battle that resulted in him evolving but still losing, his trainer became tired of having him around and then shattered his Pokeball before tossing the remnants away and then leaving him behind in the forest that they had been in. Injured, alone, scared and feeling utterly worthless that his own trainer didn't even want him anymore. He recalled wandering the forest in pain and anguish due to the injuries from his previous battle and eventually collapsing to the ground when his exhaustion gave out. He remembered laying there in the mud believing his end to be drawing close when, suddenly, a pair of warm, soft hands picked his battered body up and cradled him closely in a gentle embrace before carrying him away. Weepinbell recalled, clear as day, looking up at the kind face of Melanie smiling down at him and saying that everything was going to be okay before he lost all consciousness and fell into the realm of dreams in the comforting and soothing stranger's arms. It was here that Weepinbell's memories started to take a happier turn. The time in which Melanie patiently and lovingly nursed him back to health and cared for him at her cottage. How he eventually met Bulbasaur, Oddish and all the other Pokémon she had been caring for that, like him, had been dumped off and abandoned by trainers who believed them to be worthless. Weepinbell remembered growing to care for Melanie and the other Pokémon at the hidden village. Making friends with them and slowly feeling, over time, more care and compassion for them, and from them, than he had ever felt before in his life. Then, Weepinbell remembered when Ash first arrived at the village. He recalled how different and unique the young trainer had been and how surprised he had felt at seeing Ash treat Pikachu, his other Pokémon and even he and his village friends with care, compassion, kindness and respect. He remembered how bravely Ash fought against Team Rocket along with Pikachu and Bulbasaur to help free them and then how enthusiastically and confidently he had battled their protector and self-elected leader of sorts afterwards for the chance to capture him. Weepinbell could recall the surprise he felt at seeing Bulbasaur, a Pokémon who had mistrusted all humans except for Melanie, growing to care for and respect Ash enough to actually want to join him. What was more, Weepinbell remembered the complete and total shock he had felt at the boy asking to take he and all the other village Pokémon along with him as well so they could become a member of his team, his family. The happiness he had experienced that day at being so readily accepted and welcomed as one of Ash's Pokémon was without a doubt one of the most memorable moments of his life, but from then on, he only recalled things getting better and better. He remembered how nice and inviting all of Ash's other Pokémon were at the place they stayed at with the kind old human man when not with their trainer, and also just what a wonderful place it truly was to live and train at. He could so vividly recall how much being a part of Ash's team was truthfully like being a member of a true family, for both he and the other village Pokémon. While there had been some residual sadness from missing Melanie, Weepinbell remembered that none of those feelings lasted for long after Ash started making good on his promise to turn them into the strongest Pokémon they could possibly be once he began training them. Weepinbell could clearly remember just how hard and intense, not to mention painful, the training was at first, but he also didn't forget the unyielding and completely unreserved belief and support Ash showed each and every one of them. How, even when they were down and felt like they were done, he would come along and inspire them with powerful words to keep going and never give up because of how much he believed in them and knew they could succeed. Weepinbell felt the fear and nervousness of his first battle in a very long time when Ash decided to use him in a match, but unlike with his first trainer, Weepinbell knew nothing but kindness, inspiration and words of impassioned belief from Ash the entire time he battled. All the way up until, to his great surprise, he actually managed to pull out the win and defeat the Diglett that he had been battling against. The pride and happiness he felt at having his first victory was like a rush he had never experienced before, and, even when he lost the next battle to Sandslash and feared Ash's anger because of it, the young trainer blew Weepinbell's mind by not only failing to get angry but actually praising him for doing so well. Taking it a step even farther than that afterwards by telling him that he had every confidence Weepinbell would do even better next time and become stronger with more training. After that day, all question he had of Ash's care and desire for him as his Pokémon faded away entirely, along with all the remaining scars he felt at his former trainer's abuse and neglect. His life was finally whole and full of happiness for the first time that he could honestly ever remember. It was then that Weepenbell turned his focus back to the situation at hand when he blacked out. As the memories and images faded from his sight, he started hearing a faint but urgent-sounding voice just barely reaching his audible range from within the black void of nothing. The voice and what it was saying was hard to understand, but the longer it went on, the grass type started actually being able to hear who was speaking, and he recognized it as Ash. However, the urgency and desperation in the voice was out of place, and once the tone became clear enough that he could hear what was being said, he felt utter confusion. Weepenbell. Why was Ash calling his name? That was all Weepenbell could ponder as his trainer kept calling loudly over and over again. Each time his name. Weepenbell. As the voice gradually grew louder and even more pronounced, he could detect a sense of panic and fear in his trainer's voice that stirred several emotions within him. He could tell Ash was worried for him, and that made Weepenbell feel deeply touched and concerned that whatever had happened had caused his trainer to feel a great sense of fear. In fact, the longer he heard Ash's voice call his name, Weepenbell grew tired of being where he was and wanted to actually see his trainer and be able to interact with him. To let him know he was okay and that there was nothing wrong with him. This desire, this yearning, slowly became a burning desire and need that lit itself like a fire in his gut. As the burning and all-encompassing feeling of this bright, powerful burning sensation, which was so unlike the actual fire he felt earlier before fading into blackness, grew more and more pronounced, Weepenbell felt it like a charge of electric energy coursing through his system in a way that was similar, but opposite, to the poison that had afflicted he and Parasect. Then, almost as though it were happening behind his very eyes in the back of his head, Weepenbell experienced a bright, almost white-hot shot of power that felt and even looked like a perfectly clear bolt of lightning passing through his eyes and then down into his entire body. The immense charge of energy was like a tube of lava and acid being poured into every part of his being that, instead of hurting like he expected it to, felt like the most marvelous and empowering sensation he had ever experienced before. As the sensations grew stronger and stronger within him, the dark void around Weepenbell became warped and distorted before he suddenly felt himself being yanked from whatever state he was in currently and straight into a whole other plane of existence that he knew only too well. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX. Back on the battlefield, Ash was still calling out to his Pokémon as Weepenbell's prone and inert body continued to lay motionless as it smoked and sizzled from the roasting he had endured earlier. Turning his face away, Ash closed his eyes and clenched his fists desperately while Jeremiah stepped back several paces and appeared to be utterly astonished in a terrifying fashion. What have I done? Just when Ash's friends were about to assume the worst and believe Weepenbell to have passed on, Pikachu suddenly looked up towards his teammate's body with great grief visible on his face that quickly turned to one of confusion and hope as he pulled at Ash's pant leg and pointed towards Weepenbell. Pikachu. Pikachu Pi Pikachu. He called out urgently and kept tugging on his trainer. Pika Pi Pika. Finally looking down at his Pokemon's insistent pulling, Ash looked towards Weepenbell and found his mouth gradually dropping open in shock and total awe. His eyes widening as though what he was seeing was something that one would visualize only when hallucinating. In a spectacle that had also captured the undivided and awed attention of Jeremiah, Brock and all the others, Weepenbell's blackened body started to glow a bright white color that was almost like a shade of thick silver and pure cream. Stars were even sparking off of the unmoving grass type's body as the light suffused it until Weepenbell himself was no longer even visible. Gradually, the Pokémon started to lift up into the air until he was several feet off the ground, and then, as the light continued to glow, Weepenbell's entire form started to change and morph. He first became bigger as his body started to grow longer and wider. A long vine-like appendage then sprouted from the back of his head and dropped down behind him while, what must have been the leaves on his sides, also grew longer and more pronounced with the addition of a whole new one growing over his head. As the light spectacle finally started to die down and Weepenbell touched back to the ground, his body ceased to glow and, as it did, a sight which only served to further dumbfound everyone present could be seen clear as day standing before them. Amazingly, Weepenbell was no longer the Pokémon they were looking at. Now, a completely healed and not so much as singed Victreebel stood in place of his former pre-evolved self, looking as though he hadn't even battled yet. As Victreebel's eyes opened, they glowed a faint white, silver color before quickly returning to normal as he raised his head to the sky and called out, "Victory!" Ash was in a stunned state of total disbelief for a moment, but that only lasted seconds before the realization that his Pokémon was alright sunk in. A fact he cheered and celebrated it with his hands raised as he yelled, I mean Victreebel. You're okay. Arceus, I was so afraid something horrible happened to you. And you evolved instead. That's incredible. Pikachu pie. Pikachu called out happily at the sight of his teammate being alright, while Parasect himself appeared very relieved, if not more than a little surprised, that Weepinbell had spontaneously evolved. Ash's friends, for their own part, looked to be a mixture of both immensely relieved and also in a condition of extreme shock and awe as to how, like Starmie before him, Weepinbell had just evolved with no use of a leaf stone as he should have needed. Brock, Misty and Giselle weren't quite as shocked since they had already seen such a thing happen before with Ash's Staryu when it evolved into Starmie after an exceedingly long and grueling battling against an out-of-control Gyarados. However, Soledad handled it with much the same astonishment as Jeremiah apparently also felt by the look on his face. It evolved. How can a Pokémon that has to evolve with an evolution stone do it without one? That can't be possible. Misty looked over at the older girl and explained as best as she could. This actually already happened before with one of Ash's other Pokémon, Soledad. It was his Staryu, and after it was put into a position where it was badly beaten and almost at the end of its rope, it just evolved. Spontaneously. We still have no idea why. Not even Professor Oak knew why, Giselle added while continuing to look at the newly evolved Victreebel. He said it was a total mystery that he's never heard of happening before. I'm just glad Victreebel's okay, Brock spoke evenly in relief. For a second there I was starting to fear for the worst. While Soledad was left to her own amazement, on his end of the courtyard Jeremiah was still in a state of astonishment. I've never seen something so incredible, that was amazing. Absolutely fascinating. However, the celebration was quickly cut short by Victreebel narrowing his eyes at his and Parasect's opponents with an obvious desire to keep the battle going and give both opposing Pokémon a little payback for the pain and torture that they had given he and his partner. Ash saw this though and, still fearing for his Pokémon's safety, shook his head. Victreebel, you don't have to keep battling. You just barely avoided something really bad happening to you, and I don't want to lose you just to win a battle. Either of you. Victreebel just looked back at his trainer with a hard gleam in his eyes that clearly took Ash by surprise as he simply shook his own head and then looked back at Skuntank and Purugly again. Seeing the same look on the grass type's face as he had seen on many of his other Pokémon time and time again, Ash knew Victreebel wouldn't give up until the very end and was determined to see the battle through to the very end. Eventually, he just nodded. Okay. I'm trusting you, Victreebel. I know you can do this. I have faith in you. Hearing Ash's words that he was allowing them to continue, Parasect went to struggle up to his feet again, but Victreebel just placed the back of his head vine on his partner's shell and gently pushed him to the ground again while looking back and shaking his head. Glancing forward again and narrowing his eyes at Purugly and Skuntank, Victreebel only waited until he heard both Ash and Pikachu call out in an uplifting, supportive tone, "You got this, Victreebel Pikachu," before making his first move as a fully evolved Pokémon. Displaying speed that was far above what he had possessed before as a Weepinbell, two vines shot forth from the open space in his head and flew towards Purugly at speeds that neither opposing Pokémon could follow. Before it could even try to move out of the way, the two thick vines wrapped themselves around Purugly's throat and cinched themselves down tight enough to make the normal type gag before lifting it off of its feet like a weightless feather and then smashing it into the stone ground hard enough to crack it. Victreebel repeated this action 2 more times until Skuntank finally overcome its surprise and made a move to charge him. Seeing this out of the corner of his eye, Victreebel flung Purugly with his vines and slammed it into Skuntank's side hard enough to knock the dual poison type off balance and across the ground on its back. Whipping his vines upward, Victreebel tossed Purugly into the air with a grunt of effort and then bent down until his head was pointing in the air. Calling out his name, dozens of razor-sharp leaves started spewing forth and swarmed the airborne Pokémon as it flailed around madly in an attempt to escape. Unable to do so, however, Purugly caught the full brunt of the storm of leaves and gave a loud cry of pain as the sharp, serrated projectiles cut and dug deeply into its flesh like dozens of razor-sharp knives. Taking to the air immediately afterwards, Victreebel angled himself towards Skuntank, who was just now trying to pick himself up off the ground, and then dropped down toward his unawares opponent with all of his body weight centered into his lower half. Just as Skuntank finally got to his feet, Victreebel came crashing down on top of its back in a vicious slam attack that forced the other Pokémon to the ground again with so much force that it actually cratered the stone battlefield like a missile on impact. Skuin. Jeremiah's Pokémon cried out in pain as it hit the ground again with Victreebel's full weight upon it, whom immediately wrapped his vines around its throat and jerked its head up and around to face it. Staring up into the hard, merciless eyes of Victreebel, Skuntank tried to vocalize before the vines around its throat tightened again and effectively cut off any further noises it could make. Directly thereafter, Victreebel leaned his head down until the gaping hole in his body was facing Skuntank. Then, to everyone who was watching's amazement and slight disgust, the grass type used his vines to quickly shove the entirety of Skuntank's body directly into the hole in his head. As the poison dark type struggled wildly against Victreebel's vines while he shoved it into his body, Ash's Pokémon fought against Skuntank until it was fully swallowed up into his fruit-shaped body. The top leaf on his head falling back down and covering up the hole again as Victreebel turned and faced Purugly some distance away, who was currently struggling to stand back up with gashes and cuts all over its body. The grass type leaned down once more and pointed his head towards his injured opponent. Nasty. Misty exclaimed with a disgusted look on her face after seeing Skuntank getting swallowed up into Victreebel's body. He ate it. That's so disgusting. Brock's arms unfolded as his face took on an expression of excitement and he shook his head quickly in reply to Misty. No, he didn't, Misty. Victreebel just used stockpile. The redhead was clearly confused, so Giselle looked at her and explained patiently. Stockpile is a move some Pokémon use that allows them to swallow smaller Pokémon into their body and then use either swallow, which lets them absorb their opponent's energy, or spit up and launch them like a projectile at anything they aim for. Giselle's explanation was given credence seconds later as Victreebel's body seemed to expand and grow with the struggling Skuntank still inside of it before. In one fast movement, the leaf on his head lifted up again and his body made a trembling, convulsing motion. Suddenly, like a cannon was being fired, Victreebel's body contracted once more as the hole on his head enlarged and then expelled the smaller Pokémon he had been holding inside of him across the courtyard like a pebble being flung out of a slingshot. As though it were a blur, Skuntank flew across the field and smashed into Purugly with enough force that they both went careening across the ground like tumbleweeds before coming to a stop in big pile. Feeling that their opponents were at the end of their rope after the unexpected but very fortunate turnaround, Ash was just about to call for Victreebel to use another move when Parasect managed to struggle over next to his partner and then stood beside of him, fighting the poison coursing through his system while casting a side glance at Victreebel and nodding his head. Saying without words that he wanted to see this battle through to the very end, side by side. Smiling at the show of camaraderie and friendship between his Pokémon, Ash raised his hand and shouted, "Victreebel, use Razor Leaf. Parasect, use Giga Drain." While Parasect's body to glow in preparation to use what would most likely be his last attack of the battle before exhaustion took over, Victreebel lowered his head and got ready to deliver the payload of razor-sharp leaves he had been commanded to use. However, just as both attacks were fired, the stream of leaves that were supposed to come from Victreebel instead exploded forth like a veritable storm of green shuriken that took the form of a frontward traveling tornado. Realizing that his Pokémon had just learned Leaf Tornado by the shape and size of the attack, Ash smiled and called out as loud as he could, "Don't hold anything back, you guys. Let 'em have it." As both powerful grass-type attacks hurtled towards them, Purugly and Skuntank tried to stand up and move away, but the beating they had taken under the might and power of the newly evolved Victreebel had hampered their movements too exponentially. Because of this, all they could was become wide-eyed and attempt to shield themselves as both attacks collided with them at once and covered the two Sinnoh natives in a shroud of energy-sucking tendrils and a typhoon of leaves while Jeremiah watched on, completely helpless to do anything to assist his Pokémon. When Leaf Tornado and Giga Drain finally ended sometime later, they left their victims sprawled out on the ground with all semblance of conscious thought and perception entirely vacated from their unfocused eyes. Realizing his Pokémon were beaten, Jeremiah raised their Pokeballs and returned Purugly and Skuntank while Ash cheered his Pokemon's victory and allowed Parasect and Victreebel to rush back at him with happiness and triumph clear on their faces due to their victory. "You guys were incredible," Ash praised as he took turns showing attention to both exhausted Pokémon. "That was a crazy hard battle, but you pulled it off and did amazing. I'm so proud of you." Looking to Victreebel, he moved forward and hugged his now taller Pokémon around the midsection. "You had me so worried there for a little bit, buddy. I was afraid that last flamethrower took you out." Pulling away, he smiled genuinely up at his Pokémon and nodded. "But somehow you managed to come back from it and evolved in the process. Congratulations, Victreebel." Pikachu and Parasect both gave their own forms of praise to the now clearly embarrassed grass type, while Brock's face on the sidelines became one of intense seriousness. "This little victory is great, but the match is still far from over, so I hope Ash keeps on his toes." The others wordlessly agreed with tense nods of their heads as Jeremiah called over to Ash, "That was a most impressive battle, Ash. Most impressive indeed, and I commend your Pokémon for a job well done." However, a small smile crossed his lips. "I am far from beaten." Ash became serious again and then looked to his Pokémon. "Victreebel, Parasect, you guys did great, but you're in no shape to battle again, so I'd like you take a rest for now. Me and the others can handle it from here, I promise." Getting two equally timed nods from his battle-weary Pokémon, Ash smiled reassuringly and returned them just as Jeremiah threw two more Pokeballs out onto the field with an announcement of, "Staraptor, Gallade, avenge your brothers." In two identical bursts of light, two more Sinnoh native Pokémon appeared. One, a large flying type with a reputation for its speed and surprisingly adept aerial combat skills, and the second a dual fighting psychic type and secondary evolutionary form of Kirlia. A dual type with a reputation for being just as skillful at using fighting techniques as it was its very impressive speed and frustrating psychic type abilities. Ash took stock of his newest opponents for a few long moments before eventually making his decision. Pulling out two Pokeballs, he tossed them into the air and called out, "Firo, Primipe, let's rock." Matching Jeremiah's type lineup with his own flying and fighting type, both sides of Pokémon stared each other down for several long moments until their respective trainers called out at the exact same time, "Firo, Staraptor, quick attack." As both birds shot off at each other at matching speeds while glowing like two bright stars, Gallade didn't need the command of its trainer and instead blurred forward faster than the eye could blink, with a long glowing silver leaf of some kind forming from its arm. While Staraptor and Firo met high up in the air and struck at each other before redirecting their course and shooting off towards the other once more, Gallade appeared in front of Primipe and then spun around with the glowing blade, which was most likely Leaf Blade from the look of it, directed straight at the other fighting type's face. Obviously taken aback by the intense speed Gallade had demonstrated, Primipe only had enough time to raise his arms up in a cross block as the glowing blade sliced across his forearms with surprising force that was strong enough to make Primipe grunt and slide back a few feet. Without giving him time to recover, Gallade grew another blade out of its other arm and then lunged at Primipe once more while striking and swiping at his opponent in a graceful, complex and fast-moving series of well-honed and precise techniques. It was obvious by the way he was frantically pulling his arms up in multiple directions to block Gallade's strikes, and the awkward way he was forced to move, that the pig-monkey Pokémon wasn't used to the almost unnatural speed and precision that his lithe and agile opponent was moving at. In fact, as Gallade started attacking faster and faster to the point where Primipe began eating a few of the hits to his arms, torso and sides, Ash called out hurriedly, "Primip, break away and use focus energy." Hearing his trainer, Primip just barely managed to duck underneath of another swipe and then hopped back before hitting a low stance and grunting as a bluish energy started to emit from his body and his muscles began to bulge. Knowing they needed to start getting more momentum built up instead of being kept on the move by Gallade, Ash commanded again, "Use Mega Punch." Charging Gallade, Primip threw a powerful punch at his speedy opponent that the dual fighting type simply slid to the side gracefully to avoid and then struck out with another leaf blade that grazed his side. Flinching at the hit, Primip lunged again and started throwing punch after heavy punch that Gallade continued to easily evade and avoid as though he were moving in slow motion. Not only that, but with every punch, Primip was helpless to stop the leaf blades as counterattacks that Gallade continuously lashed out at him with. Attacks in which cut into his fur-covered skin as a form of retaliation for each missed punch Primip would throw. Seeing as how Fearow and Staraptor were still dueling it out in the air with combination attacks like Quick Attack and Wing Attack, equally matched tit for tat in speed and skill and lost to their own battle-focused mindset without the need for commands from their trainers, Ash took enough focus off of them for the time being to make a risky move that he knew had to be made if Primip was going to avoid being totally overwhelmed. Primip used Rage. Stopping his attacks for just a moment, Primip began building his inner focus and rage as his eyes started to glow red and a similar aura of energy enveloped his body and caused his arms and legs to bulge with veins as his strength increased exponentially. Turning his now glowing red eyes onto Gallade, Primip let out a bellow of fury and charged his opponent while Gallade simply stayed in one place with an impassive, stoic expression on its face. Just as Primip prepared to unleash a barrage of multiple attacks at the